Hi, my name is Venus. I've built seven-figure net worth over the past few years by aggressively saving and also putting the money towards investing. I work in tech and also have a finance education background in MBA. And I want to give you a combined perspective on fundamental analysis and valuation on Bitcoin. So I'll start by walk you through my valuation model, price prediction, and we'll take a look at the technical chart. And make sure you stay until the end because I will share with you my asset allocation when it comes to Bitcoin and the logic behind it. Without further ado, let's dive in. So first of all, let's take a look at the Bitcoin's valuation model. And this is a little bit different from what I've done with the stock valuation, where I can use the discounted cash flow model, which is more commonly used. And for Bitcoin, there is no discount cash flow model I can work on. So this is what I'm going to be using, assuming that Bitcoin take over any one of the currency markets. So let's take a look at the data input here. So number one, we have the total Bitcoin supply, $21 million, and also world's total money M2 supply. And this is the numbers that I'm going to be using to project out the max case for Bitcoin. And what M2 is basically, M1 is all the cash and checking and saving account that we have. And M2 is other type of cash equivalents that can be quickly converted into cash. And I believe that will be a good measurement that we use against the Bitcoin. And then next, we also have gold market cap because people always say that Bitcoin is digital gold and they always using it compared to gold. So we'll do that comparison here. And US GDP and stock market cap and dollar in circulation, those are just some reference point because when it comes to when we talk about big numbers in trillions, it's very hard to get our head around. So this is 83 trillion and this 23 trillion. So we just give our mind a space of how do we comprehend these numbers. And global currency reserve and money in circulation, I think those are the two other interesting numbers I would like to compare when it comes to the valuation. So now let's review the bull case for Bitcoin. So first thing first, when we talked about Bitcoin, people normally compare it to gold. So I take the total gold market number, which is 14.5 trillion. But 50% of it is used for jewelry. Apparently, you cannot use Bitcoin for jewelry. So I exclude that amount, which is roughly 50%. So use a $7.2 trillion as a total market cap for Bitcoin and divided this by the total Bitcoin supply, which is 21 million. So that will give you a little over $300,000 per coin value. And right now, as the time we're speaking, and Bitcoin is $67,000 its value. So roughly you're looking at about 400% upside. And the second way of looking at this in my logic is to look at the total money in circulation, which is this $8.2 trillion number. And it comes out to almost $400,000 per coin and almost 500% upside. And if we use Bitcoin as a global currency reserve, and that will become a little over 500,000. So we're looking at 700% upside. And these are things that becomes a little bit interesting that when we start to use the M2 number of the global money supply. So 10% of the M2 is very similar to the money in circulation number. So we get a close to $400,000 number. But if we start to think things go a little bit crazier. So I want to put this case here, even though I don't think this is a very likely case, but just want to give you an idea of what's a max case that Bitcoin can go. So if in very, very extreme cases, Bitcoin replaces 100% of the M2 money supply in the entire world, and that will become close to $4 million per coin. And that will imply to about 58x upside. So you will think this number is very, very crazy, but this is the max case. This is the max cap of Bitcoin could ever go. Even for this case to replace all the money in the circulation, for this case to happen, something has to be very fundamentally changed in the entire economy. We probably will see something, the debt that grows way out of proportion, and we are seeing hyperinflation. We're seeing the US dollar being potentially replaced, and a lot of crazy thing has to happen in the entire economy for something like this to happen, in my own opinion. And that's the upside we're looking at for Bitcoin. But if you think about the bear case for the downside of Bitcoin, it's basically zero. And there is really no other better way for me to explain this, because Bitcoin in itself doesn't have intrinsic value. If you think about it, it's a currency, and for a currency to have value, it's basically trust-based, and you have to trust the government, you have to trust the entity that issuing this type of currency, and everybody have to buy in, everybody have to have the same agreement for it to actually having value. If to some point there is nobody would pay anything for Bitcoin, no one would actually use Bitcoin or purchase Bitcoin, use Bitcoin for transaction, its value is actually going to be going to zero. So that's an extreme bear case. So when you're looking at the upside potential of how much percentage that Bitcoin can go up, and always keep the downside of the bear case in mind, because that's something very, very important. So now let's take a quick look at the charts. Right now while we're speaking, Bitcoin is trading around the $68,000, and on the technical chart side, it bounced off this $61,000 support and having a very strong green candle. And I think this signifies a very strong buying power, and it's going to stay above the 61K level. And the next level will be this all-time high, 73K. If it's below of the 73K, will go to a new high. So very, very easy to read chart. And another thing very interesting to see is if you look at the trend between SPY and Bitcoin, they're actually very highly correlated. So if you want to use Bitcoin as a hedge of stock market, I don't think that's too much of a good idea, because the correlation is very high. Now let's go to our initial question. How do I think about the asset allocation when it comes to Bitcoin? So my point of view is this, because for full transparency, I'm very heavily investing in stock market. And for someone to be able to invest a very heavy position in stock market, that means that I have a very strong view of the future growth of the US economy and all the companies that I'm investing in. And I don't see this economy collapse anytime soon. And a basic assumption for Bitcoin to be able to expand into its huge value is something has to be really bad happening in the economy. And that doesn't align with my fundamental investment philosophy. However, I view Bitcoin as a insurance. If something really, really terribly goes wrong in the economy, and it can go wrong very, very quickly. Think about how financial crisis happened. And in the past, power exchange, and when gold was being replaced by US dollar, and later on when they are completely detached from each other, and all those happen in a very, very quick time frame. So I think when something like that very dramatic black swan event happens in the US economy, Bitcoin can serve as a safe haven, because even though it doesn't have intrinsic value as a currency, but it has a way of storing value. And for the first time, you can actually hold your own money and in a cold wallet and hold your own private key, and you don't have to trust any bank, any government. All you need to do is trust yourself and hold on to your own money. And that's something that's very, very unique about Bitcoin. And also the total supply of Bitcoin is 20 million, is capped. So it has a scarcity built into it. And when something like hyperinflation in the future happens, and Bitcoin can be a safe haven if everyone fleed into Bitcoin, and the price can rise up very, very quickly. So with all that said, I'm still holding a very, very positive view towards the future economy and towards the future US economy and all the stock market and the companies I've been investing in. So I view Bitcoin as an insurance, and for people who buys insurance, people don't put a lot of money into insurance. They don't put all their money into the insurance, right? And if you do, and you're basically saying that you really hope something goes wrong, and that's kind of goes against my philosophy, and it also doesn't feel good when I think about things that way. It's quite depressing, to be honest. honest. So for me, I allocate 10% of my total portfolio in Bitcoin. And like I said, if something goes terribly wrong, and this is one of the safety haven for people to store their value, and people might start to flee into Bitcoin and the price will get inflated very, very quickly. So that's my personal point of view. And the last thing I also want to touch on is if you think about the upside of Bitcoin as an investment, let's take this one example that if Bitcoin replaces all the money in circulation, Bitcoin has to grow about 5x from where it's value right now. And this, in my opinion, is not a short-term view. This probably we won't see it in the very, very long term. But if you look at stock market, look at something like Nvidia. It went up way more than that in the past 5 years. If you look at Tesla, it also went way over the past 5 years without any disruption in the economy to happen. And these are productive assets. These are great companies. They are producing value. For every single dollar you're putting into the company, they start to generate more dollar. And that's how they create money. Versus Bitcoin, intrinsically, when you're purchasing a coin, you're basically expecting that in the future, someone else will be paying a higher price. And for someone to be able to do that, number one, is there is a lot of speculation going on with Bitcoin. A lot of people are speculators. And number two is something fundamentally has to go wrong in the economy. So one of those two things. So yeah, again, for my preference, I still prefer investing in stock market, and those productive assets can produce value over time. But I do hold Bitcoin for the reason I already mentioned, for de-risking and diversification, for something that might terribly going wrong in the future. All right, thank you so much for watching. So after watching this video, I hope you learned something. And there's another type of valuation model that's commonly used by everyone evaluating stocks, and which is discounted cash flow. And I have a separate video. I'll link it down below. The DCF models I've done for NVIDIA, and hope you will enjoy that one. And subscribe before you go, like this video, make a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see